Hi there, and welcome to an introduction to chaplaincy and spiritual care. My name is Blake Miller. I'm a board certified chaplain working with Prisma Health Cancer Institute as part of our Center for Integrative Oncology and Survivorship. I'd like you to imagine with me a few scenarios. The first one is a patient who's used to being the breadwinner and leader of the family is sidelined by a cancer diagnosis. What will it mean for him to no longer be able to fulfill these previous roles for himself and those he cares for? This could happen in a lot of ways, and it's relatively common. At the Cancer Institute, we see not just physical health related needs, but personal and familial needs as well. And the question is, what can we do for these specific needs? Another scenario, a patient has experienced a double mastectomy due to cancer and subsequent surgery. How can she feel whole after losing body parts tied so closely to her identity and femininity? These are the kinds of questions that men and women ask in the midst of their cancer treatment. Let's do one more scenario. A patient who has long struggled with questions of faith has recently been diagnosed with cancer. She asks the nurses who care for her, where is God in all this suffering? I'd like to take a second to appreciate the nurses who do have to hear these kinds of questions and often serve as a sort of first line of spiritual and emotional caregiving for patients. But it might not be part of their training or expertise to answer these questions in a long form or in a way that can truly help somebody going through these kinds of experiences. So the question is, do we have to dodge this question, admit we can't help, or is there something that we can offer? What do these patients need? You might say that they need a space to work out their thoughts and their feelings, whether those be grief or anxiety. Maybe there's even some unsuspected joy as a result of their diagnosis, or anything else that's on their minds and on their hearts. Maybe they need the ability to confront questions of meaning and their hopes for the future. What is the future going to hold with a cancer diagnosis, with a long and potentially grueling treatment, with all that that entails? Maybe they need somebody to help care for their families and loved ones and offer support to them throughout treatment. Or maybe they need a warm presence to accompany them in the journey of healing. Somebody who can listen, somebody who can stand alongside them, somebody who can tell them that they care. That, I say, is the work of a chaplain. So, what is a chaplain? To put it in just one sentence, chaplains are those who care for the emotional and spiritual dimensions of a care seeker's experience, usually a patient in a hospital. There's also corporate chaplains or military chaplains, but we'll stick with healthcare chaplains at this time. Uh, and the question might be, what is spirituality? Of course, probably some things are coming to your mind already just to ask that. But I can tell you it's one's understanding of meaning, purpose, or connection to the world and their ultimate values or concerns. Maybe to put it another way would be to say spirituality comprises that which is most important in a person's life. It's the way that you want your life to be or your sense of your place in the world. Of course, a lot of people, when they hear spirituality, immediately think of the concept of religion. As well, they should. Religion is a subset of spirituality, and it usually concerns beliefs about a supernatural power or a world beyond the material world. It's usually very important to people who believe in a religious faith. Therefore, it has a big impact on a person's spirituality. And religion often has a large impact on the way people who consider themselves religious live their lives. To go into a bit more depth, many people subscribe to a particular religion or set of religious beliefs. Billions of people subscribe to one of the major religions, uh, whereas some religions, though much smaller, have long histories and large influences in people, nations, and cultures. Of course, it's important to note that even within a single religion, there is a great amount of variation and uniqueness for each believer. Religion almost always includes certain claims about the world, truth claims, you might say, or responsibilities that those who adhere to the faith should do. And everybody sees these, understands these, and practices these truth claims and these responsibilities differently. So it's important not only for a chaplain to be well versed in major ideas of various religious streams of thought, but also to understand that any individual religious person will have a unique approach to their faith and how they live it. On the other hand, spirituality itself is universal. I believe every single person is spiritual in one way or another, to one degree or another. And I think I can prove that just by asking a few questions. Do you believe in a morality beyond your personal whims? Are there things that are right and wrong, even if you may not want to do them or may not want to avoid doing them? Do you want good for the world, even beyond your lifetime? If you're not completely selfish, you'll probably say yes. You'll probably say that you do want uh, good things to happen to others and on down the line of life. Do you believe that life itself has a purpose? And if you do, you're thinking in very spiritual terms. So let's ask ourselves, what does a chaplain do? To be technical, a chaplain participates in patient led or caregiver led conversations about a person's beliefs, desires, and emotions. Uh, this usually is just a conversation led by the patient about how they're feeling, usually having to do with their illness, their relationships, their sense of themselves in the world. And this can go in just about any direction. People can talk about everything from their hobbies to their loved ones to their fears for the future to simply what they like to eat after a long time in the hospital. Some people say that a chaplain is good for having somebody around in the hospital who can let you talk as long as you'd like. Secondly, chaplains are able to perform religious rituals or organize them with a care seeker's faith organization. Often, chaplains are connected to a faith organization themselves, or more broadly, to a religious denomination or sect. And so they can provide rituals for people who share their faith. But if not, if, say, a Christian chaplain has a Muslim patient, that chaplain can connect the patient with a local imam, or a Jewish patient can talk to their rabbi. And the chaplain would be able to coordinate with this spiritual leader or any other for the health and good of the patient. Furthermore, chaplains offer a ministry of presence in times of stress, grief, or other needs. Sometimes you just need company when a long bout in the hospital is too difficult to deal with alone. Many chaplains lead groups for grief, caregiver support, spirituality, or many other topics. And they also can lead conversations on advanced care planning. This might be documents that help inform the hospital or other providers of specific care desires. And we do all of this working directly for the hospital as opposed to working for a particular church or other faith organization. To get a little bit more in depth, let's focus on some incorrect versus correct conceptions of what chaplains do. Chaplains do not only meet with those who share their personal spiritual beliefs. Instead, they can meet with anyone of any or no spiritual expression. Uh, a Christian chaplain, for example, can meet with Christian patients, Jewish patients, Muslim patients, Buddhists, Hindus, or atheists, and are trained to provide them with a consistent level of care, no matter what their faith. Chaplains also do not only perform religious rituals like prayer, baptism, or communion. Instead, we can listen, offer counsel, offer a spiritual presence, and facilitate those kinds of rituals. Or, like I said earlier, help put patients into contact with those who can. Chaplains don't judge or rebuke the insufficiently spiritual or religious, whatever that might mean to any given person or group. Instead, they help the patients or the care seekers themselves enhance their spiritual expression the way they want. If a patient says that they're doing great in their spiritual life, that's good. If a patient says they'd like a little bit of advice or just guidance in increasing their prayer life or understanding their scriptures, chaplains can often be helpful in that. Finally, chaplains do not always advocate for specific outcomes, such as being pro medical intervention in all times. You might think of a chaplain being called in for a patient who has tired of too much therapy, too much medicine, too much time spent in these painful or costly procedures and wants to end medical intervention. And a chaplain would not advocate in a very specific way, no matter what. Instead, the chaplain helps the care seekers express their own desires for treatment, both to themselves, to their family, to their care team at the hospital. So, how does the CIOS chaplain work? The chaplain at the Center for Integrative Oncology and Survivorship. Most of my work comes in the form of extemporaneous visits in infusion clinics throughout upstate South Carolina. I visit with patients who are receiving treatments like chemotherapy or immunotherapy, ask them how they're doing, and allow them to enter into a spiritual conversation about life and what might happen next for them. I also take scheduled meetings with patients at my office on Ferris Road, connected to the main Greenville Memorial Hospital campus. I lead a monthly caregiver support group for family members and friends who are caring for people with cancer and need support of their own in the form of a place to express themselves or a place to find support, tips, other connections that might help them do their jobs better. And finally, I also offer various services for the staff and for the hospital system, such as remembrance services for patients who've passed away under nurses' care, or seminar talks, staff care, and further updates. I'd like to talk for a second about what chaplains are specifically trained to do. Chaplains are trained to respond to emergencies and difficult situations. You might hear a chaplain say, when everyone else is running out of the room, the chaplain runs in. We are trained to walk towards code blues, or in regular parlance, heart attacks. We're trained to walk towards deaths. We're trained to walk towards aggressive patients and try to offer help and assistance when we can, instead of running away from those. Also, we considered ourselves front-facing. We come to the patient and offer them the opportunity for conversation and presence, instead of waiting in an office and waiting for them to make that decision without our help. Chaplains often engage in a more informal and patient-directed form of care. It's confidential, it's supposed to be non-judgmental, and it's often a time for patients to fully express themselves in just the way they actually feel, without fear of being condemned for what they feel. And finally, chaplains often have rigorous spiritual and religious training that allows them to talk about subjects in spirituality that many other medical providers do not have training for. There's a lot of evidence these days for chaplaincy. Rigorous research has been done that showcases how working with a chaplain can improve spiritual, physical, and emotional health for patients. For instance, some evidence has shown us that there's an improvement in hope and spiritual well being for cancer patients. Other patients have responded with decreased levels of distress, depression, and anxiety. Some patients have reported improved self esteem and decreased stress. And finally, some have increased their sense of meaning and purpose through conversation and interaction with chaplain. So, knowing all of this, let's get back to those scenarios. Do you remember the breadwinner, the leader of the family who was sidelined by a cancer diagnosis? What can a chaplain do in that situation? Well, a chaplain can examine how the patient can reassess his sense of identity in the wake of diagnosis and treatment. Maybe he doesn't get to be the same kind of breadwinner and fulfill the same leadership roles in his family, but there might be new work for him to do. The chaplain can help reaffirm the patient's basic value and the love his family has for him. Some people might get wrapped up in their identity as leaders, as earners, or other roles that they play in a family and need help remembering that they are loved for who they are and not just what they provide. Finally, the chaplain can speak with the family at the patient's request regarding their feelings at the development and allow them to express themselves about how they feel and what they hope happens next. What about the patient who had a double mastectomy due to cancer, subsequent surgery? Maybe the chaplain can help that patient fully express her sense of loss and begin to cope with a new standard of living, a new understanding of who she is and who she might be. The chaplain, at the patient's request, can speak to her other care team members to ensure that they offer her all the options for further treatment, be that reconstruction or anything else that might allow her to take a better sense of control over her body in this time. Finally, he might invite her family or other caregivers into a conversation about her feelings and needs, as well as their own. How about that cancer patient that said, "Where is God in all this suffering?" What can the chaplain do there? The chaplain can walk with the patient through her history and experiences with religious faith. What has been that patient's understanding of God, and how might this cancer diagnosis have brought change to that? That's a good question worth asking and worth working through with somebody who has been trained to ask that question. The chaplain can offer the patient information from her preferred religious tradition. This might be a reading from scripture or an interpretation of doctrines that that religion holds. And finally, the chaplain can examine the feeling and expectations that are brought on by that cancer diagnosis. What does it mean to that patient in particular when they hear that they have cancer? What happens next? And what do they think of God in the meantime? So, how does this help? Spiritual care visits can lead to decreased stress and anxiety and increases in hope and well being, as research indicates, and as I hope I've been able to show. Patients are able to have open ended conversation with a staff member who themselves are able to communicate with the rest of the staff and coordinate the best care possible. Chaplains maintain attention to spiritual needs while in the healthcare setting. So while you're in a hospital and having your physical needs attended to well, it's important to know that there's somebody there who can care for your spiritual and emotional health as well. And finally, patients often tell me it feels good just to talk about these things. Sometimes being able to get your words out on these kinds of tough subjects really does have a powerful difference. And I am grateful to be able to be somebody who can help do that. I appreciate your time and attention. And if you need to talk to the chaplain, let me know. Thank you.